So let's look at a common fallacy here where people always say, oh, the games aren't fun anymore, or something has changed with the way they're designed, which is somewhat true in terms of like multiplayer stuff that kind of relies on the same maps and the same characters over and over and kind of exploits the player base for entertainment instead of, actually having a campaign and full world mechanics and everything like that. So that is one criticism that's fair. But the other side of it is the fact that people will say, oh, somehow the games themselves have changed, even though it's more so that the approach and the style of how people play them has changed. Like if you think about when you were younger or just older games in general, it's not so much that, oh, they're perfect or anything like that, right? Sometimes they could be cryptic, sometimes they wouldn't hold your hand as much, but it would be more like there's this sense of like you're trying to figure it out for yourself. It's kind of shameful to ask for help or for to look up guides and stuff like that, right? So there's a sense of this blind playthrough purity. Right. And so even as complex as that made get those older games seem, modern games are so much bigger and take so much longer, open world games, MMOs, whatever it might be. So there's almost like this concession where not only does that not mean that they're worse today, it actually might mean that they're better and more complicated because they're so complicated at times that people treat it like a foregone conclusion. Because see, before you would treat looking stuff up and all that as a stigma, and so you'd be satisfied because knowing is half the battle. So that's part of the fun and the sense of discovery. What happens today is everyone's so jaded because either we just have more resources to use or we're more willing to use them, right? Because everything is so overwhelming. Like an MMO could take you a lifetime to figure out. Even collectively, entire communities of like WoW and other stuff. There's still stuff that they're finding out now about classic and stuff like that, even now, like 20 years later. So it's like there's no way that one individual could really do all that and test all that and figure everything out. And so we treat it like a foregone conclusion, but it's kind of the opposite. Like it would take you a lifetime to try to figure something out, right? Whether in an MMO or open world experience or something like that. So it's not that it's less complicated and everything's so easy and predictable now. It's that it's so complicated that it makes people not even try to figure it out, right? They treat it like a foregone conclusion. And so they resign themselves to looking stuff up, using add ons, using guides, watching, walkthroughs and stuff like that. So it's kind of the approach that has changed, right? Not the actual products, because you look at it like, again, you would go in blind and imagine doing that with modern games that we take for granted, like, oh, this thing is so obvious or whatever. It's only obvious because you already know it or you've looked it up or it's part of the community, right? Multiplayer stuff can definitely ruin that. And there's like the ego incentive to almost show off, which is why to other people or whatever, keep up with other people. That's kind of why it's done. Whereas in single player stuff, it's still somewhat respected or sacred. But even then, like, it's again that some of these games can be so overwhelming and so big and there's so much to them that people almost give up and don't even try to figure it out for themselves. But then they'll complain, oh, everything's so obvious, everything's so easy. It's just repetitive. It's just about the mechanics now. Again, even though knowing is half the battle. So the approach has changed. And part of that is due to the insane complexity, right? And amount of time it would take if you tried to figure things out like that blind. So don't use that as a negative.